The lights in the bar were dim, and the air smelled like a mix of different worlds. Lisa Carter sat alone at a small table in the corner, her fingers wrapped around a glass of something that looked like whiskey, but tasted like metal. She wore the dark green uniform of the human colonial Marines, and the fabric still carried the dust from her last mission. 3 days ago she had been fighting on a planet called Kepler 7, and now she was sitting in a space station bar, trying to forget. The sound of plasma rifles and dying soldiers. Haven's Rest was supposed to be neutral ground. Ships from dozens of different species docked here to trade goods and information. The station floated in empty space between 3 star systems, making it the perfect place for species that did not trust each other to meet and do business. Lisa had been ordered to take shore leave here after her unit completed their mission, but she did not feel much like celebrating. The door to the bar opened with a soft hiss, and something large walked in. Lisa looked up from her drink and saw a Valorian warrior making his way through the crowd. The alien stood over 7 feet tall and had 4 arms covered in natural armor, plating that looked like the shell of some giant bug. His head was triangular with compound eyes that could see in all directions at once, and when he spoke, his voice came out as clicks and buzzes that a small device on his chest translated into human words. The Valorian looked around the bar until his eyes found Lisa. He walked over to her table with the confident stride of someone who had never lost a fight. Other aliens in the bar moved out of his way without being asked. Lisa had seen his kind before during the war, though they had been on the same side back then. The Valorians were proud warriors who valued strength above everything else, and they had recently joined the Galactic Council as allies of humanity. "Human soldier," the Valorian said as he stopped next to her table. His translator made his words sound formal and stiff. "I am Commander Zethkri of the Valorian Third Fleet. I have heard stories about your species and your military abilities, but I find them difficult to believe." Lisa took another sip of her drink and looked up at the alien without changing her expression. She had dealt with Valorians before and knew they respected direct communication more than politeness. "What kind of stories?" she asked. Zethkri's mandibles clicked together in what might have been amusement. "Stories that say humans are fierce warriors, despite your small size and weak appearance. Your species has no natural armor, no claws, no venom, yet reports claim you are among the most effective soldiers in the galaxy." The alien pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. The furniture groaned under his weight, but held. Several other patrons in the bar had started to watch their conversation with interest. Lisa noticed a group of Cruthery traders at a nearby table had turned their tentacled heads in their direction, and a pair of Vexian merchants had stopped their quiet discussion to listen. "I have personally killed 17 enemy warriors in single combat," Zethkri continued, his chest plates expanding with pride. "Each died with honor, and their deaths brought glory to my name. I have studied the combat records of many species, but human tactics seem ... primitive. You use projectile weapons instead of energy beams. You wear soft armor instead of hardened plating, and your soldiers are individually weak compared to most warrior races." Lisa set her glass down on the table and looked directly at the Valorian commander. Her green eyes had the kind of hardness that came from seeing too much death and dealing too much of it herself. "You want to know about human soldiers?" she asked. "I want to understand how your people have gained such a reputation," Zethkri replied. "A council speaks of human military effectiveness with something approaching fear, but I see no reason for such concern. What is your personal combat record, human? How many enemies have you killed in battle?" Lisa leaned back in her chair and smiled. It was not a happy smile or a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that predators wore when they found prey that did not know it was being hunted. The smile made several nearby aliens shift uncomfortably in their seats, though they probably could not explain why. This year, or just on this world? Lisa asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke from a burning building. Zethkri's compound eyes focused on her face as his translator worked to process her words. The implication was clear, but seemed impossible to believe. The commander's mandibles stopped clicking, and his forearms became very still. "I do not understand," Zethkri said after a moment. "You asked for my kill count," Lisa replied, picking up her glass again. "I need to know if you want the number for this year, or just the enemies I have killed on this particular world. The numbers are different." A Dacian merchant at the next table made a sound like steam escaping from a pipe. His scaly skin had turned a pale blue color that indicated shock or fear. The Krathari traders had wrapped their tentacles around their chairs and were leaning away from Lisa's table as if she carried some kind of disease. Zethkri's translator clicked several times before producing words. "You claim to have killed so many enemies that you must specify time periods and locations to give an accurate count?" "I do not claim anything," Lisa said calmly. "You asked a question, and I asked for clarification. If you want specific numbers, I can provide them, but first you need to tell me what numbers you want." The bar had become quieter as more patrons realized something important was happening at the corner table. A Valorian warrior was known throughout the galaxy for their combat prowess, but this small human female was speaking to him like he was a child asking about things he could not possibly understand. "How is this possible?" Zethkri asked. "You are one soldier. Even the greatest warriors cannot accumulate such numbers and survive." Lisa finished her drink and signaled the automated bartender for another. When the fresh glass arrived, she took a small sip and looked at the Valorian commander with something that might have been pity. "That is your first mistake," she said quietly. "You think like a warrior. Humans think like survivors." Lisa gestured to the empty chair across from her with one hand while lifting her fresh drink with the other. The amber liquid caught the bar's dim lights and seemed to glow like a small sun. "Sit down, Commander," she said in a voice that carried the weight of someone who had given orders under fire and watched them carried out without question. "Let me tell you about humans and war." Zethkri lowered his massive frame into the reinforced chair, his forearms finding comfortable positions on the table and armrests. His compound eyes never left Lisa's face, studying her the way a scientist might examine an interesting specimen. Around them, the conversations in the bar had grown quieter as more patrons began to pay attention to what was happening at the corner table. "Your people fight for honor," Lisa began, her voice steady and calm. "The Krathari fight for territory. The Vexians fight for profit. The hegemony fights for expansion. Every species we have encountered has clear reasons for going to war, and those reasons shape how they conduct their battles." She paused to take another sip of her drink, letting her words sink in. Zethkri's mandibles clicked softly as he processed what she was saying, but he did not interrupt. "Humans fight for survival," Lisa continued. "Not just individual survival, but species survival. When we are threatened, we do not just defeat our enemies. We make sure they can never threaten us again. We do not fight to win battles. We fight to end wars." A Krathari trader at a nearby table made a bubbling sound that his translator rendered as nervous laughter. "Impossible," he said, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "No species can sustain that level of commitment to warfare. The resources required would bankrupt entire star systems." Lisa turned her head slightly to look at the cephalopod-like alien. Her expression did not change, but something in her eyes made the trader's tentacles curl tighter around his chair. "You think like prey," she said simply, then turned back to face Zethkri. "Let me tell you about the Battle of Kepler 442b, Lisa said. 3,000 human Marines against 50,000 hegemony shock troops. The enemy had better weapons, better armor, better ships, and complete control of orbital space. They had everything except understanding of how humans wage war. She pulled out a small datapad and activated a holographic display that showed a three-dimensional map of a planet's surface. The projection was detailed enough to show individual buildings, roads, and geographical features. Red dots indicated enemy positions while blue dots showed human forces. The disparity in numbers was immediately obvious to everyone watching. The hegemony believed they could crush our expeditionary force through superior firepower and numerical advantage, Lisa explained as she manipulated the display to show troop movements. They landed their forces at 3 primary sites and began a coordinated advance toward our defensive positions. Their strategy was sound according to conventional military doctrine. The hologram showed waves of red dots moving across the planets, surface like a tide of destruction. The blue dots representing human forces seemed pitifully small in comparison, scattered across the landscape in what appeared to be desperate defensive positions. What the hegemony did not understand, Lisa continued, is that humans do not follow conventional military doctrine when survival is at stake. While they were organizing their textbook assault, we were turning their own infrastructure against them. She touched the datapad, and the display changed to show a network of lines connecting various facilities across the planet. Supply depots, communication centers, water treatment plants, and power stations were all highlighted in different colors. Captain Jake Morrison was our commanding officer, Lisa said. He had studied every hegemony military manual we could get our hands on, and he knew exactly how they would conduct their invasion, so we prepared accordingly. The hologram began to play out the battle in fast motion. The red dots advanced toward human positions, but as they moved, their supply lines began to disappear. Explosions bloomed across the enemy rear areas as ammunition depots detonated in carefully timed sequences. Communication networks went dark as relay stations were destroyed by remote-controlled charges. We did not try to match their firepower, Lisa explained. We eliminated their ability to coordinate their firepower. Every supply convoy they sent forward was ambushed. Every communication relay they established was sabotaged. Every water source they tried to use was contaminated with compounds that would not kill them immediately, but would make them sick enough to reduce their combat effectiveness. Sethgree leaned forward in his chair, his compound eyes reflecting the light from the holographic display. But how did you move through their lines undetected? Surely their sensors would locate your forces. Lisa smiled that cold predator smile. Again, we did not move through their lines, Commander. We were already there when they arrived. She manipulated the display to show the timeline from before the battle began. The blue dots representing human forces were not clustered in defensive positions as the initial view had suggested. Instead, they were scattered throughout the entire operational area, hidden in caves, abandoned buildings, and underground bunkers that had been prepared months in advance. The hegemony saw what they expected to see, Lisa continued. A small human force trapped in defensive positions, waiting to be overrun. They did not realize that most of our Marines were already behind their lines, waiting for the invasion to begin. The hologram showed the true scope of human preparations. Hidden weapons caches, underground tunnel networks, and camouflaged observation posts were scattered across the entire planet. When the enemy landed, they were not surrounding a small human force. They were walking into a trap that covered thousands of square kilometers. The battle lasted 6 days, Lisa said as she fast-forwarded through the tactical display. By the end, the hegemony had lost 80% of their invasion force. The survivors surrendered not because they were defeated, but because they were afraid. She paused the display at the final moment, showing scattered red dots surrounded by blue ones across the entire planet. The numerical advantage that had seemed so overwhelming at the beginning was completely reversed. Captain Morrison counted. 412 confirmed enemy deaths attributed directly to his personal actions, Lisa continued. I was his sergeant, responsible for coordinating the sabotage operations in the northern sector. My count for that engagement was 637. The numbers hung in the air like a physical presence. Zethkri's mandibles had stopped, clicking entirely, and several other aliens in the bar had gone completely silent. The idea that a single human soldier could be responsible for hundreds of enemy casualties in one battle challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. But that was just one engagement, Lisa said quietly. One battle on one world. You asked about my kill count, Commander. That 6-day period represents less than 2% of my total career statistics. She deactivated the holographic display and picked up her drink again. The bar around them had become so quiet that the only sounds were the soft hum of life, support systems, and the distant vibration of docking ships. Every alien present was staring at the small human woman who had, just casually described, eliminating hundreds of enemies as if it were a routine training exercise. Lisa reached into her jacket and pulled out a small device that looked like a standard military data pad but was reinforced with the kind of armor plating usually reserved for combat equipment. She placed it on the table between herself and Zethkri, the metal surface reflecting the dim bar lights like a dark mirror. You want numbers? She asked, her voice carrying the same tone she had used when describing the battle on Kepler 442b. Let me show you what human warfare really looks like when we stop holding back. She activated the device, and a stream of data began to scroll across its surface. Mission reports, casualty assessments, operational summaries, and tactical analyses filled the screen in neat columns of text and numbers. The information moved too quickly for most of the watching aliens to read, but Lisa's eyes tracked every line with the practiced ease of someone who had written many of these reports herself. The Proxima Centauri Rebellion, she said, touching the screen to highlight a particular section. 18 months of continuous combat operations across 7 different worlds. The rebel forces had seized control of 3 entire star systems and declared independence from the colonial authority. The datapad projected a holographic star map showing the Proxima system and its surrounding territories. Red zones indicated areas under rebel control, while blue zones showed government-held space. The rebels controlled significantly more territory than the loyalist forces. The rebels had good reason to think they could win, Lisa continued. They had captured 2 major shipyards, several mining operations, and enough military equipment to outfit a proper army. Their leadership included former colonial military officers who knew our standard tactics and procedures. Zethkri studied the display with the intensity of a professional soldier evaluating a combat situation. What was your role in this campaign? He asked. I was a staff sergeant then, assigned to the 5th Marine Expeditionary Unit, Lisa replied. Our mission was to conduct reconnaissance and disruption operations behind enemy lines while the main fleet prepared for a conventional assault on rebel strongholds. She manipulated the display to show troop movements and battle locations across the affected systems. The scope of the conflict was enormous, involving millions of combatants spread across dozens of worlds. Small blue arrows indicated human marine operations, while larger red masses showed rebel army positions. The thing about rebellions, Lisa said as she highlighted specific engagements, is that they depend on popular support and secure supply lines. Take away either one, and the whole movement collapses like a house built on sand. The hologram began to show the progression of the campaign over time. At first, the rebel-controlled territories remained stable while small human units moved through, their space like surgical instruments. Then the red zones began to shrink as one after another of the rebel strongholds went dark. We did not attack their armies directly, Lisa explained. We attacked their ability to function as armies. Every rebel unit needs food, ammunition, medical supplies, and communication with their command structure. Remove any of those elements, and the unit becomes ineffective. She zoomed in on a particular star system to show the detail of operations. Small teams of human marines had infiltrated dozens of rebel-held worlds, moving through hostile territory like ghosts to strike at carefully selected targets. Fuel refineries, ammunition factories, communication relays, transportation hubs, Lisa said, pointing to various locations on the display. We destroyed or captured every piece of infrastructure the rebels needed to maintain their military operations. A Vexian merchant at a nearby table leaned forward to get a better view of the holographic display. His scaled skin had turned a deep green color that indicated intense concentration. But surely the rebels had defensive measures, he said. How could such small units penetrate their security? Lisa looked at the merchant with the same expression she had used when addressing the Krathari trader earlier. They were thinking like soldiers defending territory, she said. We were thinking like predators hunting prey. She changed the display to show a different type of data. Instead of military positions and troop movements, the new information showed population centers, economic indicators, and social stability metrics across the rebel-controlled systems. Humans understand that wars are not won by destroying enemy armies, Lisa continued. Wars are won by destroying the enemy's will to fight. The rebel soldiers were not fighting for conquest or glory. They were fighting because they believed their cause was just and they could win. The display began to show how human operations had systematically undermined both of those beliefs. Psychological warfare campaigns spread doubt about rebel leadership. Economic disruption made daily life increasingly difficult for civilian populations. Strategic assassinations eliminated key figures who held the rebellion together. After 6 months of operations, rebel units began deserting faster than they could be replaced, Lisa said. Their supply lines were so disrupted that some garrisons went weeks without food or ammunition. Their communication networks were so compromised that orders from high command often never reached field units. She pulled up another section of data showing casualty figures and operational statistics. The numbers were staggering. Over the course of 18 months, Lisa had personally participated in operations that resulted in the elimination of rebel forces across multiple star systems. 437 confirmed kills, she said, reading from her personal record. That includes direct combat engagements, successful sabotage operations, and coordinated strikes on enemy positions. But those are just the individual statistics. She switched to a different view that showed the broader impact of human military operations. Entire rebel armies had been neutralized without ever engaging in direct battle. Supply networks that supported hundreds of thousands of fighters had been systematically destroyed. Command structures that coordinated resistance across multiple worlds had been decapitated through precise elimination of key personnel. Strategic eliminations, Lisa explained when she saw the confusion on Zethkri's face. Humans do not count only the enemies we kill in face-to-face combat. We count every enemy we remove from the battlefield through any means necessary. She scrolled through more mission records, each one representing months of dangerous operations. In hostile territory, the siege of New Detroit, where urban warfare had raged for 8 months. The pacification of the Outer Rim pirates, where human forces had eliminated organized crime across an entire sector of space. The suppression of the Titan mining revolt, where worker uprisings had threatened to spread across dozens of industrial worlds. Every airship I called in strikes against, Lisa said, highlighting specific entries in her record. Every supply convoy I sabotaged. Every communication relay I destroyed that left enemy forces blind and confused. Every command post I helped capture that broke the chain of enemy command and control. The cumulative numbers were beyond what any of the watching aliens had imagined possible. Thousands of individual eliminations across dozens of separate campaigns. Entire enemy formations neutralized through coordinated human military operations. Strategic targets destroyed that had crippled enemy war efforts across multiple star systems. Over 1,000 confirmed eliminations on New Detroit alone. Lisa continued, showing the detailed records from that particular campaign. The urban environment made traditional warfare impossible, so we adapted. Sniping, demolitions, psychological operations, infiltration, assassination. Whatever the situation required. She looked up from her datapad to meet Zethkri's compound eyes. The Valorian commander had gone completely still, his forearms resting motionless on the table as he processed the implications of what he was hearing. And this represents only 15 years of active service, Lisa said quietly. I am not even considered exceptional by human military standards. There are thousands of Marines with similar records, and many with significantly higher casualty counts. The bar around them had become as quiet as a tomb. Every alien present was staring at the small human woman, who had just casually described a career of warfare that exceeded the combined military achievements of most entire species. Lisa deactivated her datapad and placed it back inside her jacket, but the silence in the bar continued to stretch like a live wire, crackling with dangerous energy. She could see the fear in the compound eyes of the Valorian commander, the way his mandibles had stopped their constant clicking, the careful stillness of his forearms that suggested a predator trying not to attract attention from something even more dangerous than itself. You still do not understand, Lisa said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade through silk. You are asking the wrong question entirely. She stood up from her chair with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years moving through hostile territory where a single misplaced step could mean death. Every alien in the bar tracked her movement with the instinctive attention that prey animals gave to potential threats, though most of them probably could not explain why their survival instincts were suddenly screaming warnings. Lisa walked to the large viewing port that dominated one wall of the bar, her boots making soft sounds against the metal floor that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive silence. Outside the transparent aluminum window, the traffic of a dozen different species flowed between the docking bays like blood through the arteries of some vast mechanical organism. Cargo haulers from the Vexian trade worlds, passenger transports, filled with diplomats and merchants, military escorts from half a dozen different fleets. Every species we have encountered fights for something, Lisa said without turning around to face the watching aliens. Her reflection in the viewing port looked like a ghost made of starlight and shadow. Territory, resources, ideology, honor, profit, expansion, survival, all perfectly rational reasons to go to war. She pressed one palm against the cool surface of the viewing port, watching a massive Krathari cargo vessel maneuver toward one of the station's primary docking bays. The ship was easily 10 times larger than any human transport, its hull covered with the biomechanical armor that the cephalopod species used instead of manufactured plating. Humans fight for survival first, Lisa continued, but when survival is secure, we fight for something much more dangerous than any of those other motivations. She turned back to face the assembled aliens, and several of them involuntarily moved backward in their chairs when they saw her expression. It was not anger or hatred or bloodlust. It was something far worse. It was the calm certainty of someone who had made peace with the idea of dying for something more important than their own life. We fight for each other, Lisa said simply. Words hit the watching aliens like a physical blow. Zethkri's compound eyes widened as the implications began to sink into his warrior's mind. The Kratheri traders wrapped their tentacles more tightly around their chairs. The Nexian merchants had gone, completely motionless, except for the rapid flutter of their gill slits that indicated extreme stress. "You think individual glory matters," Lisa said as she walked back toward her table. "You count personal achievements, personal victories, personal honor. You fight as individuals who happen to be part of larger groups." She sat back down and picked up her drink, but did not take a sip. Instead, she held the glass like a prop in some elaborate performance design, to illustrate a point that the watching aliens were only beginning to understand. "Let me tell you about Private Danny Rodriguez," Lisa said. 18 years old, fresh out of basic training, assigned to my unit during the Titan mining revolt. Kid had never been in combat before, still wrote letters to his mother every week. Carried pictures of his girlfriend in his helmet. She paused to look around the bar, making eye contact with several of the aliens who were listening to her story. Each one looked away quickly, unable to maintain contact with her steady green gaze. Rebel miners had fortified one of the main extraction facilities and were using it as a command center, Lisa continued. Our job was to take the facility intact so the Titan production could be restored without months of reconstruction. Standard assault operation, nothing particularly dangerous by human military standards. The aliens waited for her to continue, but Lisa let the silence stretch for several long seconds. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a different quality, softer, but somehow more intense than before. The rebels had booby-trapped the main entrance with a plasma grenade rigged to motion sensors, she said. Military-grade explosive. Enough to kill everyone in a 20-meter radius. We were advancing in standard formation when my helmet display showed the activation signal. She lifted her glass and took a small sip, using the pause to let the watching aliens imagine the scene she was describing. A group of human soldiers moving through hostile territory, death waiting for them in the form of an invisible electronic trigger. Rodriguez was walking point, closest to the device, Lisa said. He had maybe 2 seconds to react when the sensors activated. 2 seconds to dive for cover, to shout a warning, to try to disarm the device. Another pause, longer this time. The bar had become so quiet that the aliens could hear the soft hum of the station's life, support systems, and the distant vibration of ships docking at the outer pylons. Instead, he threw himself on top of the grenade, Lisa said, covered it with his own body to contain the blast. Kid who had never been in combat before, who was scared of his own shadow during training exercises, who still missed his mother's. Cooking. He gave his life to save the rest of us, without a second thought. The impact of the story was visible on the faces and other expressive features of the watching aliens. Several of them made sounds that their translators could not render into coherent words. The concept of voluntary self-sacrifice for the benefit of others was not unknown in the galaxy, but the casual way Lisa described it suggested something far beyond normal military loyalty. Lieutenant Amy Foster held the Kepler station choke point. For 6 hours while her unit evacuated 3,000 civilian colonists, Lisa continued, her voice taking on the rhythm of someone reciting a litany that had been repeated many times before. Single-handed action against superior enemy forces, no backup, no support, no hope of survival. She bought time with her life so others could live. She set her glass down on the table and leaned forward slightly, forcing the watching aliens to meet her gaze whether they wanted to or not. Colonel Ben Hayes led a suicide mission into the heart of the hegemony fleet to prevent the orbital bombardment of New Shanghai, she said. Took a single fighter craft against a battle cruiser and detonated his own reactor to disable their main weapons. 2 million civilians on the planet's surface never knew his name, but they are alive because he chose to die. The list continued, each story adding another layer to the picture Lisa was painting of human military culture. Soldiers who had chosen death over retreat, officers who had sacrificed their own lives to save their subordinates, entire units that had fought to extinction rather than allow enemies to reach civilian populations they were sworn to protect. "You count individual victories," Lisa said when she finished her recitation. "We count collective survival. Every human who dies in combat is not just one soldier lost. They are someone's child, parent, sibling, friend. We do not just avenge our dead. We make sure the enemy understands that killing humans carries a price they cannot afford to pay." She picked up her datapad again and activated a different display, this one showing casualty ratios from various human military campaigns. The numbers were stark and brutal in their implications. For every human soldier killed in combat, enemy forces had lost dozens or sometimes hundreds of their own fighters. When Private Rodriguez died saving his unit, we made sure the rebels who killed him understood their mistake, Lisa said quietly. When Lieutenant Foster fell defending that choke point, her death was repaid with compound interest. When Colonel Hayes died protecting New Shanghai, we hunted down every ship that participated in that attack and eliminated them completely. The watching aliens stared at the holographic display showing human retaliation patterns. It was not random violence or emotional revenge. It was systematic, calculated, methodical destruction designed to teach lessons that would be remembered for generations. The silence that followed Lisa's words was different from the earlier quiet that had fallen over the bar. This was not the silence of curiosity or confusion, but the heavy stillness that came when intelligent beings suddenly realized they were standing at the edge of an abyss they had not known existed. Even the automated systems seemed to have grown quieter, as if the station's artificial intelligence had decided this was not a moment for unnecessary noise. Commander Zethkri finally found his voice, though it came out as a whisper that his translator barely managed to render into human words. "Your species," he said, his compound eyes reflecting the light from the viewing port like fragments of broken glass. "You are not just warriors. You are a plague." Lisa looked at him with something that might have been disappointment, the way a teacher might regard a student who had failed to understand an important lesson despite clear explanation. "No, Commander," she said gently. "We are gardeners." The comparison seemed so absurd that several aliens made sounds that their translators rendered as confused static. The idea that the small human woman, who had just described decades of systematic warfare, could compare herself to someone who tended plants was beyond their ability to comprehend. "We cultivate peace through the application of overwhelming force," Lisa continued, her voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious to children. "We make war so terrible, so final, so utterly devastating that our enemies choose cooperation over extinction." She gestured toward the viewing port, where the traffic of different species continued to flow between the docking bays. Ships from dozens of worlds, carrying goods and passengers and information in the kind of peaceful commerce that had once seemed impossible in a galaxy full of competing civilizations. "Every species that has chosen to work with humanity prospers," Lisa said. "Trade increases, technology advances, conflicts decrease. Every species that has chosen to fight us." She did not need to finish the sentence. The implication hung in the air like the smell of smoke from a distant fire, a warning of destruction that could be avoided with the right choices or embraced with the wrong ones. A new voice cut through the oppressive quiet, and every head in. The bar turned toward the source. Admiral Kate Sullivan stood in the doorway, her human fleet uniform crisp and perfectly maintained despite the long journey from whatever ship had brought her to Haven's Rest, where Lisa represented the sharp edge of human military power. Sullivan embodied its strategic depth and institutional authority. "Sergeant Carter," Sullivan said with a slight smile, that somehow managed to convey both approval and gentle reproach. "Making friends again?" Lisa stood immediately and came to attention, her casual demeanor replaced by the rigid discipline of a professional soldier acknowledging a superior officer. "Just answering questions, ma'am," she replied. Sullivan walked into the bar with the confident stride of someone who commanded fleets and made decisions that affected entire star systems. The aliens watched her approach with the same wary attention. They had given Lisa, but this time their wariness was mixed with something approaching recognition. Admiral Sullivan was known throughout the galaxy as one of the primary architects of human military strategy. "I assume you have been discussing humanity's military capabilities," Sullivan said as she approached the corner table where Lisa and Zethkri sat. "Let me add some context the sergeant might have missed." She activated a personal holographic projector that created a display far more sophisticated than Lisa's datapad. The three-dimensional star map that appeared showed the current state of the galaxy in remarkable detail, with different colors indicating political affiliations, trade relationships, military strength, and economic activity. "Every world you see in blue was once hostile to human interests," Sullivan said, manipulating the display to highlight specific systems. "Every system marked in green is now a willing trade partner. Every red zone represents active threats that we are currently negotiating with." The pattern was unmistakable once it was laid out in visual form. Human influence spread across the galaxy like a slow tide, not through conquest, but through the systematic conversion of enemies into allies. The blue zones representing former hostile territory had grown steadily over time, while the red zones indicating active threats had shrunk correspondingly. "Sergeant Carter's kill count is impressive," Sullivan continued, "but it represents only the tactical level of human conflict resolution. The strategic level is far more significant." She zoomed in on specific systems, showing population figures, economic indicators, military strength assessments, and diplomatic status reports. The numbers told a story of systematic, calculated expansion, backed by the implicit threat of overwhelming retaliation for those who chose to remain hostile. "The choice facing every species is simple," Sullivan said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who spoke for an entire civilization. "Join humanity's growing alliance and prosper, or maintain hostility and face the consequences. We prefer the first option, but we are prepared for the second."